we'll do the live thing first. Like, hey everybody, welcome back to the Bigmark Podcast. I'm your host, Bigmark. If it's your first time watching, welcome. If not, welcome back. Like I always say, if you ever wanted to reach out to the podcast, let us know. If you wanted to hear a topic or come on the episode, please join us here. We always love to have you. And like I said, even if you wanted to reach out and let us know how you felt about a podcast. I mean, while you're at it, why not drop us a review wherever you're listening? And if you're watching on YouTube, like and subscribe and do all that fun stuff. I mean, that's the best way to support the podcast, and I thank each and every one of you for being here and listening and watching. But if you ever wanted to support even further, check out our Patreon, patreon.com/thebigmarkpod. Again, I thank each and every one of you for being here, because you could have been anywhere else in the world, and you're here with me tonight, or today, or this morning, or this evening, whenever you're listening or watching. It's always fun to do these episodes about TV shows and movies. I'm not sure, maybe it's just something about having the camera here and the lights, and it's a form of media in itself. There's a meta aspect of it maybe, but maybe it's just my own passion for TVs and movies. And it was funny, in some of my research, I was kind of looking up some information on the show Mad Men, which is what we'll be talking about today. 2007 show created by Matthew Weiner. And again, I in this research, I saw not a lot of, I don't want to call them critiques, reviews, lots of reviews, lots of great different in-depth looks into what the series was, meanings and impacts and all kinds of things like that. But one of the most interesting articles I came across was quoting the big three, and the big three being potentially the three greatest shows of all time. Those three being The Wire, The Sopranos, and Mad Men. And Matthew Weiner actually has something to do with both The Sopranos and Mad Men, which will probably come up a few different times in this episode, just because I'm a fan of both. And if you've watched one or either of the series, or if you've watched either of the series, both series, I should say, you would notice many similarities. Anyway, just a little bit of a background about the show if you've never seen the show. And I mean, I guess we'll get to some spoilers eventually. So if you haven't watched the show, stop this right now and go watch it. I mean, I'm rewatching episodes right now. That's kind of what sparked the idea to do this episode. But I probably won't reveal too much, but I might reveal some things. So again, just spoiler alert. But Mad Men is an American period drama created by Matthew Weiner and produced by Lionsgate television, I should say. It ran on cable network AMC from July 19th, 2007 to May 17th, 2015, which is crazy. When I saw that for the first time, I was like, 2015, geez. I didn't realize it went that far into I was almost finished university, and this was still on TV. 7 seasons in total, 92 episodes, and it's set during the period of March 1960 to November 1970. So it covers, a very, very critical period it's in New York City in the United States, but it's set all over. But it's a very, very critical period in the world, but of course in United States history. So it's really, really interesting. Again, it came out in 2007, which is kind of on the heels or on the end, the death throes of the Sopranos run. And the reason why I bring it up again, not only does Matthew Weiner, have something to do with the show, but also there's something. It ran on cable AMC, so it was a little bit more accessible. It wasn't on necessarily HBO. I guess AMC might have been something you had to pay for in certain areas, but it was a little bit more of an accessible show. Let me just put it that way. So in some ways I see it as kind of like the more digestible, the more palatable Sopranos. Because, I mean, the Sopranos did have some more, crime heavy, especially, and if we're talking about the big three, talk about The Wire. The Wire is very crime and, justice heavy. And if you're not interested in that shit, you're not interested in that shit. But as my buddy Nick Evans said, that office stuff is sick. Like, living in there, drinking in your office, smoking darts, having fun, doing your thing. A little bit more about the show itself, kind of the plot. It begins at the fictional Sterling Cooper advertising agency on Madison Avenue in Manhattan, New York City, and continues at the new firm of Sterling Cooper Draper Price, later named Sterling Cooper and Partners, in the Time Life building at 1271 6th Avenue. According to the pilot episode, the term Mad Men was coined in the 1950s by advertisers working on Madison Avenue to refer to themselves. Mad being short for Madison. In reality, the only documented use of the phrase from that time may have been in the late 1950s. So who knows if that was a big thing. But anyway, the series' main character is a charismatic advertising executive, Don Draper, played by John Hamm or Juan Hamm. Phenomenal. He's very, very good. Don Draper, who is initially the talented creative director at Sterling Cooper. Though erratic and mysterious, he's widely regarded through the advertising world as a genius. Some of the most famous ad campaigns in history are shown to be his creations. In later seasons, Don struggles as his highly calculated identity falls into a period of decline. The show follows the people in his personal and professional lives, most notably Peggy Olson, played by Elizabeth Moss, who is introduced as Don's secretary, but soon discovers her passion for copywriting. It also focuses heavily on the characters of Pete Campbell, played by Vincent Carthizer. Sorry, buddy, I'm sure people have stumbled on that last name your whole life. Vincent Carthizer, a young executive at the firm. Betty Draper, played by January Jones, Don's wife. Joan Holloway, played by Christina Hendricks, who is amazing. The firm's office manager, Robert Sterling, played by John Slattery, one of Don's partners, and in later seasons, Sally Draper, Kiernan Shipka, Don's oldest child. As the series progresses, it depicts the changing moods and social mores of the United States throughout the 1960s and early 1970s. Mad Men received widespread critical acclaim for its writing, acting, directing, visual style, and historical authenticity. It won many awards, including 16 Emmys and 5 Golden Globes. It was also the first basic cable series to receive the Emmy Award for Outstanding Drama Series, winning it each year of its first 4 seasons, 2008 to 2011. It's widely regarded as one of the greatest television series of all time and as part of the early 21st century golden age of television. So again, absolutely amazing show. The heart of it, surrounds this advertising agency and of course Don Draper. And I think the thing with Don Draper that, we can see in this, as I just mentioned, this golden age of television, I think we started to see people introduce, with the success of The Sopranos and the Tony Soprano character, people and writers and executives and television producers and showrunners started realizing that people were interested in this kind of anti-hero character. And Don Draper is exactly that. He's not necessarily someone you want to be. There's he can put on a stoic presence, and I think that's one of the things in the show. And I was talking with my people about it, and one big idea that I wanted to throw around with this whole idea is that Don Draper doesn't really have a character arc. He doesn't really go anywhere. He doesn't really change. He's almost always this through line through the entire series. And again, pretty deplorable character, not faithful to his wife, willing to step on people in his business life, cutthroat in that sense. in many ways, you know, the reason why he even exists, spoiler alert, is because he, you know, accidentally killed his commanding officer and then assumed his identity. And just that as the show goes on more and more, you just see all this deplorable stuff, and I almost see again no character arc for Don. He's just this through line through the entire show, and you kind of start with the series beginning. You start kind of feeling like, oh, you know, look at the job, he's got the life, he's got the, you know, he's working in New York City, he gets to do whatever he wants, he has women and he has money and he has all this fortune, and in his business he's famous. And then all of a sudden that starts to wear off, and you almost start getting used to his bullshit and his antics, and you know, things are crumbling and changing all around him, but he's just the same. And then by the end of it, you're kind of sick of his bullshit. But that's his whole thing, is that he doesn't change. He never changes. And in some ways it's actually interesting, because you look at a lot of these other characters that pop up in the show. Again, of course, you mentioned Peggy Olson, Elizabeth Moss' character, you know, Betty Draper and Joan Holloway's character arcs changed so much. I mean, Sal Romano is one of the great television characters. I mean, playing a gay man in the 60s, I thought was amazing, but he just kind of mysteriously left after season 3. Then, like, as the years go on, all these other characters that start to kind of come in. Jared Harris, who's a great actor, he comes in and plays Lane Price when they're amalgamating with this other company. So it's like really interesting. You know, it covers a lot of these different, you know, family life and work life. Again, where The Sopranos was, yes, some family life, don't get me wrong, but Tony's work life was murdering people. So it was a little bit different, where Don's work life is, again, this like office life, and there's politics there and ins and outs and all those different things, and business that kind of goes along with it. But I think that's the magic of the show, is that Don is such a stalwart character. He's almost this anchor, even though he's a bit of a deplorable. He's this anchor character that you can kind of just keep coming back to, and no matter what kind of happens around him, he does everything in his power to keep things the same and hide his identity and make sure that he has ultimate control over all the happenings in his life, which again is like, in some ways you're like, okay, yeah, everyone wants to have control over the life, but again, you know, not through manipulation or, you know, skullduggery or thievery or whatever you want to call some of Don Draper's moves, just you know, blatant disregard and brash. Anyway, it's really cool. Again, being in the 60s too, it's almost like kind of watching, you know, people that would be our grandfathers or grandparents' age, or, you know, our parents' parents kind of thing, you know. I mean, my parents weren't, or my grandparents weren't working in offices like this in Manhattan and fucking New York City and shit. But again, it's an interesting insight into kind of the world that was happening, and there was so much change that happened throughout the 60s. And I mean, yes, you can look at today and see how much things have changed, you know, with technology and certain things, but like generally speaking, if you took a time machine back to 2014, if you just went back 10 years and you just kind of looked around, it would probably take you a little bit to kind of figure out that you were back in 2014. You know, it's not kind of night and day over these last 10 years that, you know, the vehicles and fashion and music and things are so different. And that's what was happening in the 60s, again, with wars and, you know, the Summer of Love and you know, this hippie movement that was happening, and there were so many new ideas that were kind of coming out, and people were experiencing all these new things for the first time. You know, the Beatles coming and going, and rock and roll and just drugs and all these things kind of all happening at once, let alone civil rights movements and other major happenings. People went to the fucking moon. You know, it's so heavy and so many things you can touch on, while all this world is so dynamic, and then you have Don Draper in the middle trying to be this fucking anchor, this statue that exists, but inevitably you can't change. And maybe at the end, there's a glimmer of hope that he might change, but it all kind of falls back in on itself. And I don't know, it's an interesting show that way. Again, like I mentioned, it's that idea of that the main character isn't necessarily someone that you want to be, like, in general. So really interesting writing. Again, I think that has a lot to do with the similarities with The Sopranos. I found this really interesting little write-up on that Mad Men is Sopranos. So like I said, kind of alluding to the fact that I think Weiner saw the success of The Sopranos and said, how can we kind of repackage this? I mean, that's the thing, right? Good artists create, great artists steal. And I mean, he's not really stealing his own stuff, but recreating and trying to come up with a new package for something is creative, but he's kind of springboarding off this idea. So like I said, obviously Weiner worked on The Sopranos before Mad Men, but this is a rundown of all the similarities. The main character, obviously Tony versus Don. The main character is a professional working man with identity issues and mommy issues all around. The main character's job is a boys' club where women are secondary figures. The main character cheats on his blonde wife by constantly having not-so-secret affairs with women of certain type, usually dark hair, mysterious, sad, moneyed. And the main character gets divorced, separated from her later in the series. Main character has a beautiful house and possessions envied by others. Main character goes out west and does drugs in the final season, finds serenity. Ginny Sack is Pauline Francis. Both shows feature a man who hangs himself when he discovers there is no way out of the lifestyle. And I'm sure there are many more. This is what this guy says. I'm sure there's many more. But honestly, I think that kind of encapsulates all those different similarities. And I think it's so funny how close it is when you look at it that way. But again, like I mentioned, it's one of those shows where you can kind of dip into these side stories. You can explore some of these interesting avenues and ideas through these other secondary characters, because you kind of know, oh, Don's always going to be the same here. You don't necessarily have to be wondering, oh, who is Don going to become? Where are they going to be? Because you start to realize, like I said, you just start to kind of get used to it and go, okay, like this is how Don Draper is. But again, learn more about the other characters. And then I think the cinematography is great. The writing is great. It's kind of one of those shows that always, drops one-liners and stuff. Like there's one scene in the first season where Don comes in. He's like, Peggy, get me a glass of water. Someone forgot to tell the sun it was October. And it's fucking Don Draper. Oh, who is it? I forget the comedian's name. I'm sorry. I can picture your face, but Pete Holmes, I think, maybe. Anyway, he does a really good Don Draper expression, because you just have to like do a really low voice and talk fast. Like someone was talking to Don and said, if it's Betty, and said, Don, like, what do you want me to do? What do you want me to say? That's his Don Draper. So I think it's a pretty good one. I ripped it off, but yeah, John Hamm does an excellent job of, again, just being that kind of tortured soul who's just trying to put the pieces together just so he can kind of keep it going. Again, it's almost like that was like a little bit of the blueprint for Suits in a way, which I think probably came out around the same time. But again, this whole idea of that, like having this secret and not necessarily being who you say you are. And And even how they address it in Mad Men, where Burt Cooper, who's also a great character, just says, who cares, man? Like, the guy's doing his thing. And it's interesting, right? Like, it was a world, there wasn't these digital footprints and stuff. And, there was chances for people to kind of like remake themselves and become completely different people. And it's an interesting world. And I think that's what, there's almost a nostalgia to it. But a strange nostalgia, because I've never wanted it. But again, I have this feeling in New York City, which has probably been cultivated by movies and television. But a romanticized notion about New York City. And, I would have loved to know it in all of the eras, even though there was times where New York City wasn't necessarily the safest place to be, depending on what time period. But again, super, super interesting. Like I said, I'm doing this rewatch now, and you're kind of, I don't know what everyone else thinks, but I always find the first season of any show, it's always the one you kind of like remember last. I mean, depending on the last time you did a rewatch of any show, be it The Office, be it whatever you like to watch over and over. You watch that first season, it kind of gets you back into it. You're super excited, and then you got to watch the rest of the series. And the last season always feels super fresh. I mean, again, I'm not making a huge revelation here. This isn't rocket science, but again, the first season of any show is always this introduction to what a show can be. And, we talk about The Sopranos, we talk about The Wire. There's almost, depending on how the writers work and depending on, how much the showrunners have their finger kind of on the pulse and how much they care about it. I mean, usually when it's on a national network, they're getting feedback, they're getting ratings, all these different test audiences and all that shit. So there's always this chance where, there's this opportunity that you can actually like kind of, steer the ship a little bit. I think they did that with Sons of Anarchy when they realized a lot of their viewers were women. And again, I think it's a great show. I think anyone had a chance to like it. I don't think, it was definitely violent. But it was dramatic. I don't think it was necessarily like written solely for men or women or anything, but I think they started changing some of the storylines when they noticed that, to kind of appease their new audience. And it just changed the show. I mean, like, again, it was attracting, a diverse audience because it had good storylines and it was unabashed in a lot of the ways it approached things. And just seemed contrived near the end. But again, Mad Men is one of those shows where that the whole first season, so many things happen. It's such a big introduction, and it lays the groundwork for a lot of things that kind of continue on. I mean, again, kind of Don and Pete Campbell's rivalry, if you will, is, the seeds are laid there. Peggy Olson, her whole character arc is all started there. And I mean, again, you can almost look at the show like it's about Peggy, right? Because really, she's the one who changes so much throughout the show, and it's wonderful to see, and Elizabeth Moss does such a cool job. And again, it's one of those things where it being a period piece, some of the subject matter is interesting. Again, a woman doing this wasn't as happening. So she was, she was a pioneer. She was groundbreaking, breaking through those glass ceilings and making things happen. Meanwhile, you have Joan Holloway's character who, she is kind of not, I don't want to say searching for validation because I feel like she's confident, but she wants to remain, she wants to have that pride in her job, although she's like a head secretary. Again, there was this camaraderie I felt, again, although there was maybe a class system back in these times, I don't know about class system, I should say, but there was more defined gender roles back in these times, that seemed oppressive. And yes, maybe it didn't allow for a lot of women to have the opportunity, and they had to do so much more, like Peggy does in the show, and she has to do so much more just to be seen and heard. And that's, of course, not fair. But I think humans, in general, work better when there are defined roles in any sense, and especially at work. And in no way, shape, or form am I condoning crossing any social boundaries, any social lines, sexually or otherwise, especially like they do on the show, constantly banging their secretaries and shit. Being in a support role and actively supporting other people is so important. It's just as important as the people that are on the front lines doing their thing. And I think with this movement, and it's important, I'm not saying that it's not important, but with this empowerment movement and making people feel like they are worthy and wanted and proud and happy to do their job. I don't want anyone to ever feel like, servers, bartenders, people who do our assistants, it shouldn't be seen as like a lowly serf job. Yes, again, you're not on the front lines. You're not necessarily carrying the ball over the line. So you're not always going to get the attention or the certain things that, see, now this is where the problem lies, because then that basically just means like, oh, all the men get the attention. So I don't want to say that. That's not what I'm trying to say. But what I'm trying to say is, no matter what gender you are, if you're in a leadership role, if you're in a support role, know your fucking role. And don't fucking step outside it, and everything will work out a little bit better. And that's going to say the leadership and the people who are doing it, don't get boastful. Don't let your ego get to you. You'd be nothing without the support role. And they need you just as much as them. So like, let's all just hold hands and let's just get along. So what I'm getting at is, back in these days, with secretaries, with their bosses, with this whole thing, there was this fine moving machine. Now at home, who knows what's going on with that, with the housewife and things like that, because that just didn't seem to work out super well with ignoring your wife. So again, obviously Don Draper is not the pinnacle of this. Again, if the mom was at home just watching the kids, or the dad just at home watching the kids, and mom was at work bringing all the money in, or whatever partner, your one partner was at home, the other partner, who cares? There's nothing wrong with one or the other. And at one point, the one hand, I should say, you shouldn't necessarily feel like, hey, I'm the breadwinner. I get to make the calls here, because your other partner's at home supporting. And when the other partner's at home supporting, they're going to have to do certain things that are going to seem in servitude, let's just say it, right? So, but there's nothing wrong with that. It's not a lowly thing. It's not, you are important. Everyone is important. That's definitely not the takeaway from Mad Men. If you're going to watch the show, if you've gotten this far and you haven't watched the show, but if I'm sure, because you're still with me, I'm sure you've watched the show, you kind of understand. Again, it's one of those things where I think this movement of anti-heroes and, more negative characters on TV started becoming interesting to people, is because that's not how people are. People don't really act that way. They see these things on TV and movies and things like that, and it becomes this strange, with, not wish fulfillment in the sense, but the Freudian sense of you're seeing these ideas or these fears come to fruition, and realizing that, they're not as scary as they are. Of course, there's bad people out there. Of course, there's evil people out there, and they do bad things, but that's not everyone, and it's not necessarily the way it is on the show. It's a microcosm, and it's hyperbole. But a great show nonetheless. Anyway, go check it out. Let me know what you think. If you've watched the show before, hit me up in the comments. I want to know what you think. And if listening to this podcast is, and you listen to it without watching fucking Mad Men, hopefully I didn't completely ruin it. And if somehow this made you watch Mad Men, and then you come all the way back and watch this and see what I talk about, thank you. Good show, isn't it? Anyway, thanks, y'all. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Thanks for being here. I love y'all. We'll see you soon. Doot, 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 doot. Doot, doot. Peace. Peace.